All right, everyone, I want to thank our sponsor today, Organifi. You know, we talk a lot on this podcast about healing and the healing journey. Well, an integral part of that are the foods and the drinks that we consume. I know you know this. If you're like me, you know the importance of eating healthy, but you don't always have the time or the willpower to cook with all the colors of the rainbow. Organifi's superfood blends make it easy and enjoyable to add more variety and nutrition to your day. These are delicious organic powders that you can add to water or milk, stir and drink. It literally takes 30 seconds. It is that simple. A couple weeks ago, I was right about to start a green juice fast, a kind of a short mini fast. And I kid you not, the night before, Organifi reached out to me about sponsoring this podcast. And I will tell you that I was thrilled because this is aligned with what I'm doing. I'm familiar with Organifi. I've used them in the past before. I want to be able to bring to you quality products and things that are going to promote a healthy lifestyle. Organifi green juice is the one I use. It's the one I use every morning so that I know right away I'm starting the day on a healthy note. It's loaded with vitamins, loaded with minerals, and essential antioxidants. As a listener of the Trauma Therapist podcast, you can get 21% off any item by going to Organifi.com/trauma and use the code trauma. Once again, to get 21% off any item, go to Organifi, that's Organifi.com/trauma and use the code trauma. All right, everyone, I want to thank our sponsor today, Organifi. You know, we talk a lot on this podcast about healing and the healing journey. Well, an integral part of that are the foods and the drinks that we consume. I know you know this. If you're like me, you know the importance of eating healthy, but you don't always have the time or the willpower to cook with all the colors of the rainbow. Organifi's superfood blends make it easy and enjoyable to add more variety and nutrition to your day. These are delicious organic powders that you can add to water or milk, stir and drink. It literally takes 30 seconds. It is that simple. A couple weeks ago, I was right about to start a green juice fast, a kind of a short mini fast. And I kid you not, the night before, Organifi reached out to me about sponsoring this podcast. And I will tell you that I was thrilled because this is aligned with what I'm doing. I'm familiar with Organifi. I've used them in the past before. I want to be able to bring to you quality products and things that are going to promote a healthy lifestyle. Organifi green juice is the one I use. It's the one I use every morning so that I know right away I'm starting the day on a healthy note. It's loaded with vitamins, loaded with minerals, and essential antioxidants. As a listener of the Trauma Therapist podcast, you can get 21% off any item by going to Organifi.com/trauma and use the code trauma. Once again, to get 21% off any item, go to Organifi, that's Organifi.com/trauma and use the code trauma. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist podcast. Very excited today to be doing another Trauma Therapist newsletter episode. Every month on the first of the month, I send out the newsletter, and today I'm going to be doing a little review of the May newsletter. And these episodes are not meant to be an exhaustive overview of the newsletter, but or rather an exhaustive dive into the newsletter, but just provide an overview because there's so much going on right now in the field of trauma and trauma treatment. And I'm just going to say it right off the bat. I mean, one of the biggest things I think right now is the book that Bruce Perry and Oprah did together called What Happened to You. And why I think that's important really is simply because of Oprah's platform. I mean, her reach and reputation is obviously huge. And you couple that with the amazing work that Dr. Bruce Perry does, and I think the incredible reputation that he has, and the incredible books that he's written, you get a book that I think really is positioned to just make a splash in terms of raising the awareness of trauma. Anyway, so that's really exciting news. All right, so let's dive in here. On the cover this month is Christine Forner. And I put her on the cover because she is just amazing. She's been on the podcast previously. And she has an amazing, her real focus is trauma and dissociation. I'm going to read a blurb here from what she included in the newsletter. But one of the reasons why I wanted to put her on the cover and feature her because of the amazing work she does, but also her ability to articulate really these kind of complex concepts, particularly around dissociation and trauma. And before I forget, one of the new segment we're starting this month is a writing segment. So each month I'm going to be featuring essays on trauma or mental health topics. So if you're a writer and you write about mental health, and preferably you've written a first-person account, I welcome your submission. You can reach me at guy@thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. All right, but let me continue with Christine Forner, and this is what she included here. She said, "I'm a therapist who specializes in complex trauma and dissociation. I think it's very important that clinicians comprehend the nuances and specificity of dissociation. Many view it as rare or a specialty, but it's not. Dissociation is different than fight and flight. It's different than post-traumatic stress disorder, complex stress disorder, and even what people call borderline personality disorder. Dissociation is powerful, common, and unique to other ways of surviving traumatic experiences. It has to be cared for differently than many and most other issues. It's a huge factor in all therapeutic and healing settings, and knowing how to work with someone who chronically dissociates as a way of coping or surviving can make or break therapy. I strongly advise all therapists who work with traumatized humans learn about dissociation in all of its iterations." And she wrote a lot more, which is included in the newsletter. I'm obviously not going to go into it all, but so she's been on the podcast a few times. She also did a masterclass video series in Trauma Therapist 2.0, if you're interested in that. But again, someone that you definitely should know about and read what she's written. Okay, so the next segment here is modalities. And as you hopefully know, each month we feature a different modality. And the goal here with the newsletter and to include modalities was to help you as a trauma therapist, as a new trauma therapist, not only learn about different modalities or maybe just read up again on specific modalities, but to, in so doing, help you learn like which modality speaks to you, right? You might read about IFS or sensory motor psychotherapy or somatic experiencing, whatever, and think to yourself, this one doesn't make sense to me, or this one doesn't ring a bell or resonate with me, or this one does, and go on to pursue that further, read up on it or maybe take a workshop on it. And that's, I think, really crucial because there are so many modalities out there, right? And how do you go about figuring out which one you want to learn more about or which one makes sense to you? So that was my thought in including it in the newsletter here. So this month, we're featuring focusing, and the intro I took from the site focusingtherapy.org, and I'll just read it here. Again, I'm not going to read everything, but I'll just read a snippet of it here. Whether you have previous experience with therapy or are considering therapy the first time, focusing-oriented therapy can offer unique and empowering experience. Focusing-oriented therapy is deeply respectful and empowering of the client's thoughts, feelings, and experience. Rather than the therapist being, quote, the authority, the therapist and client participate in a collaborative process that nurtures and values the client's experience. This respectful attitude creates a safe and supportive environment in which difficult issues and persistent obstacles to change can be openly explored. Clients often begin experiencing increased awareness, sensitivity, and empathy toward themselves and their own personal predicaments. All right, just a snippet there. And obviously, from that, I think everyone would say, wow, that sounds good, really good. You can read further about that. And in addition to, including a modality, we also feature a therapist who is utilizing and or specializing in that particular modality. This month, it's Dr. Leslie Ellis. She's been on the podcast. She's a seasoned therapist. Awesome guest. I'll just read a snippet of what she wrote here. Let me first get a sip of my hot coffee. All right. So she says, when I started my career as a therapist, I learned focusing as a gentle, embodied approach to working with trauma, and I can't imagine doing my job without it. Clients tell me the same thing, that this feels like the only way they would have been able to find, articulate, and integrate the deep layers of their embodied trauma experiences. The psychotherapy world has caught up with where focusing was decades ago, and there are many embodied approaches to trauma work now. I still prefer focusing above all because of its client-centered roots. The pace, direction, and depth of the work is all led by the client's own felt sense, a term coined by focusing founder Eugene Gendlin that has become part of our common parlance. All right, so again, you can read more about Leslie Ellis in the newsletter when you subscribe at thetraumatherapistnewsletter.com, but she's also awesome. Again, you can check her out on the podcast if you'd like. All right, moving on. The next segment here, we have books and articles. I mentioned to you the first book by Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry that's just out. I just started that, so I'm probably about 50 pages in. It's called What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. Highly recommend it. I'll just read a little snippet here. It says, our earliest experiences shape our lives far down the road, and what happened to you provides powerful scientific and emotional insights into the behavioral patterns so many of us struggle to understand. Oprah says, through this lens, we can build a renewed sense of personal self-worth and ultimately recalibrate our responses to circumstances, situations, and relationships. It is, in other words, the key to reshaping our very lives. That was one of the books. Another book that's out, and this one by another podcast guest is by Sarah Payton, and it's kind of a follow-up to her initial book, which was called Your Resonant Self. That came out, I think, last year or the year before. But this one is Your Resonant Self Workbook, From Self-Sabotage to Self-Care. And I just interviewed her yesterday. We talked about the book, and her episode's going to go live a week or two. But highly recommend this book. Now, I'm not getting paid to recommend these books, so I'm not doing that for that reason. I'm doing it because I think her work is amazing, and this book is really incredible. It really goes into understanding what she calls the kind of contracts we have with ourselves, often subconscious contracts, and which involve kind of refraining from providing warmth for ourselves or care for ourselves, and in turn being harsh on ourselves, not taking care of ourselves, and running these often cognitive patterns that oftentimes do result from trauma and traumas. But in the book, she has distinct chapters that lead you through recognizing these different ways that we are with ourselves, and she goes into a lot of neuroscience as well, which is really interesting, especially for those of you who are neuroscience geeks out there. But she goes into each chapter is a different way of, or different step on the journey of managing, working through these different contracts, with ourselves. Really, really fascinating. Highly recommend it. Again, it's called Your Resonant Self Workbook. All right. Another book, and I'm not going to go through all the books here, but I've listed a few other ones. One other one I'll mention is The Development of a Therapist, Healing Others, Healing Self by Cozzolino. It's part of the Norton series on interpersonal neurobiology. This one, I'll just read here a snippet. It's written for the more seasoned professional. Cozzolino's most recent book discusses concepts such as enhancing executive functioning, discovering the deep narrative, finding the secret ally, and the necessity of continuing personal growth and development through one. All right. I don't know if you follow me on Instagram or not, but when I do interviews, I usually do 2 interviews a week. I conduct 2 interviews a week. And usually I get so excited. I get so pumped up after these interviews because I get to talk to incredible people. And what I usually do is I go on Instagram and I talk about it. I want to share that excitement. Usually there's about a 2-month turnaround on my podcast, which means that they don't go live for a couple of months. And I have a problem with that. Because I want to share it. I get so excited about these things. So what I've done is I've created a membership called Trauma Therapist Plus, and it allows people for $5 a month to access these episodes about 2 months before they get published to the public. And you can also listen ad-free, which is really cool. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in listening to episodes before they get released to the general public and also listening ad-free, check it out. You can access it by going to Apple Podcasts and just clicking on any of the episodes that has a plus, P-L-U-S, before it. It's exciting. I'm excited about it, and you'll also help support the podcast. Thank you so much for being a listener. I really appreciate it. Take care. One's career. Chapters include navigating the therapeutic space, also the mind of the therapist, and even one entitled "What Do Zombies Do for Fun?" All right. Anyway, so a little selection of the books I included in this month's newsletter. The article, each month we feature an article. I've been including some articles from the most read articles section out of the Journal of Trauma Dissociation. And this article that we included this month is called As the World Becomes Trauma Informed, There's Work Still to Do. That's by Catherine A. Becker-Blees, Catherine A. Becker-Blees. Anyway, really interesting article there about trauma informed and the ramifications of that. So that whole article, with their permission, we included in the newsletter. The next section is workshops. So again, as I go through these different sections, let me just read the sections that I have included in the newsletter each month. So there's on the cover, we talked about Christine Forner on the cover. We have modalities, books and articles, workshops. Each month we include conferences and events. Then there's schools and programs. There's incredible people section, and I'll get to all these, and writing section, and then behind the scenes. All right, so continuing on with books, we did books and articles, right? All right, so workshops. Again, so many workshops out there, right? And some of these actually have passed because the newsletter goes out on the 1st, but there was one that went out on the 2nd, one workshop that was on the 2nd that was called Trauma Awareness and Embodiment by Leslie Bullock, LCSW. You can actually check out her work too. Really inspiring women and therapists, Leslie Bullock, Bullock. Again, May 10th, there was an EMDR training through the Trauma Institute and Child Trauma Institute. Again, you can check out their work. That's the Trauma Institute and Child Trauma Institute. And I'll say one more here, which is happening actually May 20th, Reclaiming Shakti, working with South Asian women survivors of sexual violence with Ashley Raju. Just a bit here about this. At the conclusion of this webinar, participants will be able to list the 7 major chakras and what they represent. give examples of barriers faced by some South Asian women survivors on their journey to well-being, and recognize the importance of using a South Asian model of well-being when working along South Asian survivors. So just an incredible array of workshops. Again, there are a few others that I've included in the newsletter. Next section here, conferences, events, and summits. Again, there are many conferences that came out each month. But again, I wanted to provide you each month on the first of the month a list of curated conferences, events, and summits that you may or may not find important, but I think is really important to keep abreast of what is going on in our community here. April 30th through May 2nd, there was the Healing Trauma Conference. I actually presented at that in a sidebar type of deal. It was really, really cool. May 17th is called the Be Bold Summit, a creative free online event for mental health therapists and humanitarian workers. And then one more, May 26th through May 29th, there's a 32nd annual Boston Trauma Conference run by none other than Bessel van der Kolk. Psychological trauma, neuroscience, embodiment, and restoration of the self. Trauma Research Foundation and Bessel van der Kolk would like to extend a warm welcome to the annual Boston Trauma Conference. This conference will present both basic research about the impact of trauma over the life cycle and a range of effective interventions that are being practiced in clinics, schools, prisons, and across the world. Again, that's May 26th, 32nd annual Boston Trauma Conference. All right. And there's several more here that I include in the newsletter. Moving on, schools and programs. The goal here was to list in the newsletter different schools that are offering trauma courses, trauma certificates, trauma courses. And it's crazy to me. I still, to this day, and this maybe won't seem crazy to you, but I still have guests on the podcast who share with me that, when they were in school, there weren't that many trauma courses, or trauma wasn't even mentioned that much. And, I realize this is not news, but it just still shocks me in a sense that we are living in a time where you can't say definitively that schools, psychological programs, all of them are including trauma courses in their in their work. It's not the case, which is crazy to me. Hence, which is why I included this in the newsletter. So each month we look at two. I put two down here. I'll share one with you. It's through Cambridge College. They have a trauma studies certificate program. For more than 45 years, Cambridge College has been a leader and pioneer in adult learning, with the main campus in Boston, Massachusetts, and 4 regional locations nationwide. They provide academically excellent, time-efficient, and affordable higher education to a diverse population of adult learners. A graduate certificate in trauma studies provides professional training in crisis intervention and trauma treatment, education and prevention, leading to certification. Okay, so once again, that's in Cambridge College Trauma Studies Certificate Program. That's one of the 2 that I included in the newsletter. Now, one of my favorite sections, if not my favorite section, is the Incredible People section. Pause here for another sip of coffee. All right, what I wanted to do in the Incredible People section is to share with you people, most of whom I've had on the podcast, but who are doing amazing things. I get off the podcast many times with my guests, and I am buzzing with excitement and inspiration at what they're doing, at the work they're doing. And to me, this is so important. Why is it important? Because you get to see and hear about and read about other people who are doing really inspiring things, and thinking, you could think to yourself, well, maybe I could do that. And that's what happened to me when I was commuting. And even before, I was still in graduate school and I was commuting and in my internships and, listening to podcasts, always thinking about my clients, but listening to podcasts about entrepreneurs doing incredible things. And I was thinking, what if I started a podcast? What if I tried to do something amazing or incredible? Not that I am, but you just reach for the stars in a sense, And I think including people who are doing incredible things is really, really cool to me. The first one here is Julia Rose Polk, who's been on the podcast and definitely one of my favorite people in the trauma field. She's joined me on the podcast a few times, and when you hear her, you can understand why. Early in her career as a trauma therapist, she realized a sobering truth that most people who need trauma therapy will never actually end up on a therapist's couch. She also realized that most of her adult clients were coming to her to resolve early childhood trauma. So her next question was, who needs to know about trauma most? And instantly she knew: teachers. So she began building a platform called Trauma Camp for Teachers. And you can check her out by going to Trauma Camp for Teachers or email her. Just look up Julia Rose Polk and you'll find her. But awesome woman and really exciting for what she's doing. Next person here, and I'll just include two of the three, is Beck G. Cohen. A strong and sage voice within the psychology field on the topics of LGBTQ plus community, gender, and sexuality. He's a master's level clinician with an undergraduate degree in sociology with an emphasis on gender and sexuality and a master's degree in addiction counseling. He's also joined me on the podcast a few times, and I'm including it here because if you're not familiar with him and his work, you should be. Beck G. Cohen. Definitely check him out. And there's another one that I'm not going to include here, but again, if you're interested, you can check it out at thetraumatherapistnewsletter.com. All right. So the next section is the writing section. And this was the first time I included it. And I wanted to do that to just provide different texture to the newsletter, a different perspective, someone else's perspective, and ideally a personal perspective. And that's exactly what we got with our first essay by Megan Stonelake. And her essay is called Tea Time. She works as a school-based therapist at a federally qualified health center here in Oregon, which is where I am, which is pretty cool. She says the children I serve have all experienced trauma. Sadly, often they continue to live in unsafe situations, and I spend a large amount of my time advocating for my clients and making reports to child welfare, while also trying to engage caregivers in the hopes that I can help to improve the lives of these kids. Her essay is pretty powerful, so I included that. And the final segment here is behind the scenes, which is a video. And each month I share a short video of what's going on behind the scenes here at the podcast, at the newsletter, and just give you a little glimpse into my personal life, which you may or may not find interesting, but it's just part of the newsletter, and I love doing it. I love sharing what's going on with you. Anyway, so that's it. A little snippet of the newsletter. Once again, if you'd like to subscribe to the newsletter, check it out at thetraumatherapistnewsletter.com. And I just want to take this time to thank you for listening to this podcast and supporting the podcast and the reviews. I really appreciate them, and they make me feel awesome. And that's it. Have an awesome day. Check it out, traumatherapistnewsletter.com.